Hello. A lot of times we get expense reports and credit card statements that we need to enter as AP transactions in GP. Integration Manager is a great tool to do this. There are several ways that we can accomplish this task. Today we will look at a simple but laborious way of importing these AP transactions into GP. Generally, we get a file something like this. This file contains the information that's coming from the credit card statement or from the expense report. You can see that it's got the employee or vendor name, the date that the activity took place in, the dollar amount, and the description on what the amount was spent on. Now, we need to add a lot more information before it will be ready to be imported into GP. Let's take a look at this file. This file is typically the only information you'd really need to import this, and this kind of information that will change from period to period. So in this case, we have the batch ID, which is an absolutely required field. So is the vendor ID field. We have a document date field, which is more like the transaction date. We also need to put in a description for the transactions, and probably the most important, the GL accounts that are going to be used. But this alone is not enough to create AP transactions. For that, we're going to need a file which is something like this. Now, obviously, one of the things that I want to illustrate is the need to have these fields and additional information in this file, which obviously creates a lot more work for the end user. Tomorrow, when we look at the more feature intensive integration manager method, we will work with a file that has much less information than this one, which will be easier to build and process. So let's take a look at this file. If you want to use this method, you'll see that for every transaction you will need a line which has the credit amount as well as the AP account, and the distribution type also needs to be specified. 6 is the purchases distribution type, and 2 is the accounts payable distribution type. All the credit amounts should be shown as negative. Another thing that we need to do is to come up with a unique document number. In this case, it is a combination of the batch ID, the vendor ID, and the first segment of the GL account. This is assuming that the first segment is a separate company within the same database, and we will need a separate GL account, a separate AP account for each type of transaction with a different company segment. So for example, this is transaction number 1, and since my expense account is starting with the 000, my AP account also needs to be 000, first segment of the AP account. Same thing on the second transaction, my expense account starts with 100, and so my AP account also starts with a 100, and so on and so forth. I'll give you this file for you to take a look at and probably work with, so that you can use this as a template to import your transactions. You also need to be aware that all the debit amounts need to add up to your document amount. So you can see that these 4 lines, which are the debit amounts for this particular transaction add up to $7,955, and my document amount is for the same amount. So once we have a good understanding of the file, we can go ahead and save this file as a text file or a CSV file. The next step is to open up Integration Manager and create a new integration. We'll give it a name. Let's call it AP Integration. We can specify the maximum number of errors and warnings after which it needs to stop. We'll leave that as 10. And if you want to give a description, you can. It's not required. Next step is to add the source. Now this is going to use two sources, a header and a detail, and the header will be grouped by certain fields. The header will be the transaction information and the detail will be the distribution information. So let's add the header first. This is going to be a simple text source. So we can define a new text and say AP header. And look for the file. This is going to be a tab delimited file. My first row contains column names. I'm going to make sure that I can see all the columns. The next step is to make sure that there are no blank rows. So typically what I do is I take my first column and say it's not equal to a blank. I put one space in there and add into criteria. This is to make sure that there are no blank rows in my file. Then I'm going to go into sorting and I'm going to group based on all the fields that I need on my header, and that would be my batch ID, my vendor ID, document number, document date, description, and document amount. Now when you say OK, it's going to say that the other fields will be ignored and they will not be shown, which is perfectly fine. So we're going to say OK. So now we have our AP header. Just to make sure that all the information is visible, we right click and we can do a preview. Looks good. So next step is to add the detail file, which contains all the distribution information. So we're going to go ahead and add source again. It's going to be a text again. We're going to define new text. This one's going to be AP detail, or you can call it distribution. Now we're going to use the same exact source file. We're going to, again, it's a tab delimited. First row contains columns. Now in this case, we don't have to group it, but we're still going to make sure that there is no blanks. So I'm going to put a space in there, add into, and OK. So once we have two sources, it requires us to create a relationship between the header and the detail. Obviously, our document number is the unique key between the header and detail. So we drag from document number to document number. And since I did that twice, it gave me a little error message. So once that's done, the last step is to add the destination and map it. So in this case, we're going to go under payables management and we are going to select payables transaction. And I'm going to say open. And then I'm going to double click on destination mapping to map all my fields. So make it a little bit bigger so it's easier to work with. All right, so my source field, my batch ID is here, so I can select that. I can also drag and drop, for example, my description, I can just drag and drop it there, description. And my vendor ID, there it goes. Batch ID, vendor ID, document number, of course, document number. You can go ahead, click in there, get the document number. Again, click in the field, and then you get a little box, click on it, and then it'll open up the source object, and we can select the one purchases here, links to document amount. So you'll select that. And one more field that we need to do is the document date. So we have to change this from use default to source field. Then we'll get this little box. You click on that, opens the source object, click on the document date and say select. One other thing that we need to do is go under options here and make sure that when there's a missing batch, we tell it to add the batch, not cancel the transaction. So this is the header. Now we're going to go in and put in the distribution information. For that, we're going to click on the distributions folder here, and we're going to go under options again. First, we're going to set our source to detail. We don't have to do this on the header level, but it helps to do it on the detail. So here again, distribution account is simple enough. We select the account. Again, we drop down, get to the detail. And then again, so change this to source field under distribution type, select that, and distribution type, that is debit amount. Again, for debit amount, since we're using the same column, we're going to use this little feature here. If it's a positive number, we're going to say it's a debit amount, but it's coming from the same column. And for credits, we're going to say use a negative source field, which is the same exact one, which is the distribution amount. And the last one is our distribution reference. Once we have all of this done, we can go ahead and save the integration. And just make sure that our GP is open with the company into which you're importing the AP transactions, and we can go ahead and run this. And it is done. So now this was a more time intensive and labor intensive way of importing AP transactions into GP. Tomorrow we will look at a more feature intensive way where we use integration manager a little bit more, but which will reduce on the time at the end of the day by regular users when using GP. Thank you.